Hi everybody, in this video I'm going to go over the scholarly research chart. We did go over this in class, but I'm going to go over it in this video. So just to back up a little bit, to get into where everything is, all the things you need to do the assignment correctly, go to the blue bar on the left side of your screen and go to weekly lessons assignments, and that's where I am here. And then I always try to provide an overview at the very top once you enter that particular unit of study. And then down here, I try to form some consistent sections so that you can find things easily. So all the assignment materials and things that will help you do the assignment sort of in handout form, or the actual assignment will be in the first little folder. And then I always have a video presentation folder. I may put PowerPoints, YouTube videos, my videos, anything that I can do to help you with the assignments associated with that unit of study. Then I try to do a resource folder, and then there's a submission folder. The submission folder is always going to be at the bottom, and that's usually where you go last to submit the work. I put quizzes and submission links in that folder. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to properly produce the research, scholarly research chart. So I'm going to go into the actual folder. And a couple of things. We always do a very generalized preliminary research search, and I have a very basic chart for that. This is not what that video is about. This video is actually the larger assignment where you do 3 sources and you sort of break them apart with quotes and the different aspects such as the citations in that chart. So here you can see that I've embedded sort of a guide and a sample. So there are a few little instructions up here, but you can use this to help guide you through the assignment. The sample has sort of 2 columns here, one with an explanation for everything and one with the example. When you do your chart, you're just going to kind of be doing what's in this far right column, this little middle column. Now this is the column of what you're doing for each part, but this whole section here, and I'll try to highlight it. Let me see if I can highlight it. Oh, it's not working. But this whole explanation and criteria resources column, this is here as explanation, so your chart will not look like that. So I'm going to skip ahead and go down here to the actual template. What you need to do when you do your assignment is you need to open up the template, and you'll see, if I can open it, I hope it opens for us. The blank template just has the 1 column for information of what you put in, in for me to grade, for me to see. So as you can see here, we don't have that column of explanation. So I wanted to point that out just in case it's a little confusing, because it looks different with what you're putting in and what I've shown you in that example. The cool thing about the guided template, or the guided kind of complete example, is that there's some links in that middle column that you can use to produce your correct project here. So you're going to do each thing 3 times. So just keep that in mind, and then I'll go through each little section. But I'm going to use the example that I've posted because I think that has more information in it. But just know that when you do yours, you need to go to this blank template and include all the information. So, and then also notice that you have to do 2 quotes per source. So you're going to have 3 sources, scholarly sources that you show, and for each one of those you'll have 2 quotes. So the whole project for this assignment will have 6 quotes in total, 2 for each of the 3 required sources. And then the other thing to remember, because students often they'll skip over certain parts of the requirements, do not forget your source paragraph. You're going to be writing a paragraph for each source where you sort of combine the explanations of all these things into the paragraph. And I'm going to sort of go over that as well in the video. So, and then it just sort of starts over. As you can see, here's source 2. So you'll do this 3 times. All right, so I'm going to get out of this template. That's what you'll use. And then we're going to return back to the little sample that's embedded in the class. So we're just going to go through each part. Hopefully this helps you produce a very polished source chart. Okay, so up to this point, as we get to the source chart, you have done some preliminary research, and then that was sort of done with Google, social media. I think some students used some Netflix documentaries, some YouTube documentaries. It was just a chance for you to explore your topic and narrow it down to a purpose, what you're trying to prove. Remember, this is going to be argumentative, so you're going to prove one point of view, one side of an issue within that topic. So we're not doing an informative research paper. There's nothing wrong with an informative research paper. Those are often done. Just the difference between an informative research paper and an argumentative one is an informative one just basically states facts and gives information only. And then an argumentative research project tries to persuade the audience or tries to give information on one side of an issue to, again, persuade a thought process about that topic. So that's sort of what we're doing in this class with our topics. Okay, so let's just go through each little section and discuss. So I have posted a video also on how to properly utilize the citation generators to produce a quality and error-proof citation, so watch that as well. Once you have created your citation, you will put that in this first little section, the first little line, and you do need to show the hanging indent to show proper formatting. So then that's all you have to do. You just have to show the citation, okay? This is linked to Purdue OWL, which has some information on MLA formatting, and then there are also page numbers for the little seagull that you can utilize as well for MLA formatting. Remember that some students may not have the most recent edition of the little seagull, so make sure that your little seagull has sort of a seafoam green color, and that's the correct one. You can link to the correct edition through Inquisitive. So there are options for different ways to get information about the citations. After you've cited the source, then you're going to identify the source genre. What type of source is it? So we've sort of talked about that I require and really like to see a lot of good scholarly research. So, but within scholarly research, there are different genres that can be there, such as journals. Some websites are considered scholarly, newspaper articles, documentaries, ebooks. There are physical books can be scholarly. Textbooks can be scholarly. So we want you to identify here what type of scholarly source you're using. And there are some examples over in this instruction column. After you identify it, then you're going to further identify it to say, is it popular? Meaning popular would be something like a newspaper article or a magazine article. And there are more scholarly magazines such as Newsweek, Time, or something U.S. and News and World Report. There are some scholarly magazines or newspapers. It could be the New York Times or, any number of reputable newspapers. And it could also be scholarly or trade. Trade would be like maybe a professional organization website, a professional organization journal. That would be more trade related because it's related to that trade. And those are considered, good scholarly resources because the people who are producing them, have the credentials to qualify for being scholarly. Okay. After you've sort of done these identifiers with the citation and the identification of the type of source is. Next, you're going to evaluate it. So here's a little link to the Norton field guide that you can use. And then there's a little worksheet or a little handout here that you can actually click on this link and go to that. And I'm going to do that just to show it to you. We're not going to look at all of them. But here's a little worksheet that can help you determine, why is this something of quality? How are you supposed to evaluate it? What kind of authority does this information carry? How accurate is it? So you can read through that. And so, like I said, that's just like a little handout. So a lot of these things are embedded here with this chart, for example, that'll help you produce this assignment. So what you want to do here is you want to do a sentence or two where you're actually evaluating the source. So there is a certain type of document called an annotated bibliography. And with the annotated bibliography, researchers often summarize their work to show someone who's reviewing the work the quality of the sources that have been found for that project. So with that, what you want to do with the annotated bibliography is you're summarizing and you're sort of evaluating the source for anyone who would look at it. So this is sort of what you're doing here. We're sort of emulating the process for doing an annotated bibliography with this chart, but we're sort of taking the pieces apart so you can do them one at a time. In English 112, we do an annotated bibliography, so these skills will come in handy when you do that assignment for English 112. So again, you're going to evaluate it. Here's a sample of how someone has evaluated a source. Next, you're going to summarize in a sentence the article or the source. So this one reads, in his New York Times article, Attached to Technology and Paying a Price, Matt Reichel describes several negative effects of the constant use of technology. So a couple things we see here, and this should always sort of be your rule of thumb when you're summarizing something. You always want to identify who or what or how it was published. So here the New York Times, which is a newspaper, published this article. Then you want to identify the title of whatever you're using. So the title of the website, the title of the article, whatever, the title of the book, and then the author. If there is no author, which sometimes occurs, but sometimes if there's no author, you should maybe question the credibility. That doesn't mean that it's not credible, but it is something that you should question, because most of the time credible things do have an author. They do have a research team. It's multi-layered, not just, hey, a staff writer just threw this on a web page. So be careful with something that may not have an author. It doesn't mean 100% it's not credible, but it could mean that you need to question it in another way. And then if you notice this last little part here, this is a summary of the main idea of the source. In this case, the article. It could be the main purpose of the website. It could be an overview statement of the book that you're using. Whatever the main purpose of that article, website, video, or a book is, that's what you will put in the summary. Over here, there's some instruction for this. So I've sort of explained it verbally here, and then you can review it over here as well. But that is a basic summary sentence. And anytime you're using a source, even if it's within an essay, it is always a good idea to emphasize where, what, when, who produced that source, because it gives you credibility as the person including the information. You don't want to create a mystery for the reader. You want the reader to feel comfortable with reviewing the materials and sort of know why you've included it and what makes it credible. After you've done all this sort of establishment of what article is being utilized, you're going to include 2 quotes. So to start with, you want to just put in the quote. Just give the quote that you're going to review. Now, I want to make it apparent and clear, and I want to repeat it 1,000 times. This is something that you just need to, burn into your memory. Here, you're going to show the quote just by itself. No other words, just the quote. But when you write a paper at a college level, you can never just drop in a quote. It's called a quote bomb, which is not good, or it's called dropping in a quote. It's sort of like you don't want to just like drop litter on the street. You don't want to just drop trash and not pick it up. When you just put a quote into a paper without any kind of setup or any kind of information leading into it, the quote really has no purpose at that point because you've not applied it to the point you're trying to make. So I just want to make that very clear that yes, in this chart, we are actually dropping in the quote. It's because you're sort of featuring the quote and you're telling me as the reviewer, this is the quote I'm reviewing. So where it says quote number 1, over here, quote number 1, in the column, you're just going to give the quote. Then we're going to paraphrase the quote. That means in your own words, the way you would phrase it. And I'm saying that like, don't phrase it like you would phrase it with a friend or in a casual conversation, but in an academic tone, in an academic way. I want you to rephrase that quote as if you were explaining it to me. I've said, hey, tell me what that quote means. And then you're going to, in turn, in your phrasing, give that quote back. So that's what a paraphrase is. So when you write an academic document, you don't want to just stack a bunch of quotes because at that point, what are you really writing? That's just kind of, you're being a parrot. You're repeating and just kind of throwing in a bunch of stuff that you copied and pasted. Anybody can copy and paste. The way you show that you have academic abilities to use sources and then to integrate them into an academic document is you have to apply summaries and paraphrasing, and you have to apply reasoning behind sort of the meaning of these things. You have to integrate them properly into the paper or the project that you're producing. So sometimes instead of just using a direct quote, which is an exact quote as it appears in the source, you may decide, hey, I could probably just explain this information just fine without using the direct quotes. So I often tell students, use the direct quotes where the person has phrased it so well. Maybe they have used certain phrasing that you don't feel like you can, properly paraphrase. Use those direct quotes, but if it's something that can be explained by you as the researcher, go ahead and paraphrase that so that you can vary the way you're integrating information into your paper or into whatever project you're doing for research. This may even happen with a lab report. This may happen with a summary or review of something that you're doing in a certain class. So it doesn't have to be a full essay, but anytime you've integrated information from a source, you need to kind of do a variety of things. You can direct quote, you can paraphrase, you can summarize, and you need to show that variety if you want to be a well-rounded academic writer. So here, in your own words, you're going to just paraphrase it in a sentence, maybe 2 sentences, whatever you need. One of the things that is a pitfall with paraphrasing for many students is they will say, okay, I'm going to take the quote, I'm going to copy and paste it in, and then I'm just going to change a couple words, and then it's not the direct quote anymore, and then I'm just going to move on. That is still considered plagiarism because you've used too much of a percentage of the original quote, and you've only changed 1 or 2 words. It's not really your paraphrase. So make sure when you're paraphrasing it, you're actually typing in your own writer's voice the information. I sort of equate that to like if you go see a movie or if you watch a movie on Netflix or something, and then you're telling a friend about it. You're sort of putting that information in your own words to relay the same kind of idea, but it's not the original. So be careful with paraphrasing because a lot of people end up plagiarizing, and that can be a little bit of a mistake. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to practice how to properly integrate a quote into the text of a written document. So when you integrate a quote, this is how a quote should appear in an essay. So before I mentioned that a lot of students mistakenly just drop in a quote and then they don't add any phrasing or they don't apply it to anything. So this section on how to integrate a quote is really going to help you learn how to properly put a quote into the text of an essay, okay, or into the text of an academic writing. Okay, so here we see that we're identifying, again, the author, and we're going to sort of give some introductory information to kind of add this quote into the phrasing. So here it says, according to journalist Matt Reichtel, and then the quote. And so the quote hasn't been just dropped in alone. We have some identifying information that tells us who actually wrote this information. And you could also include, according to journalist Matt Reichtel in his New York Times article or some other identifying information. And then you put the quote with it. I want you to avoid, some students say, oh yeah, Miss Austin said that I can't drop in the quote, but I've got to put some words with it. And then they sort of start writing it like they're writing a novel, and they'll put the quote, and at the end, Reichtel said, or something. And that sort of reads more like a creative novel or the way, creative fiction would be written, and we're writing academic work. So it's usually better to front load the identifiers before the quote rather than at the end. And some students are very skilled at integrating quotes, and they'll do a little bit of phrasing before the quote and a little bit of phrasing after the quote, and that's perfectly fine too. So you can integrate the quote. A couple things to be careful with: long quotes. Anything longer than 4 lines is considered a long quote. I really want you, anytime you have the desire to include a long quote, to go back and review if the quote is really necessary to be that long. Let's say the information at the very beginning of the quote is important and the information at the very end is important. You can use ellipses. Ellipses are those 3 dots that you can use. And if you use that in the middle of a quote, it's just showing the reader that, hey, there was some other information in this source, but it wasn't necessary to the proof here in this paper. So you can do that. You can also just use a portion of the quote from the article that you're using. Another thing that, I just hit the table, sorry. Another thing that you can, that you should be aware of, and I see this mistake made a lot with students. A lot of students will write something like, in Matt Reichtel's quote. That is incorrect, because it's a quote because you, as the writer, are quoting something. It's not a quote in the article, okay? Because in the article, this Matt Reichtel guy, he wrote those words. So it's not a quote in his article. So you should not identify it as a quote in your paper. That's misidentification. Occasionally, an author will quote someone else. In that case, you really need to phrase that. In Tom Jones' article, he quotes Dr. Smith as stating, and then you've sort of shown that that's what the author used as a quote within his article. But most of the time that's not true, because you're actually quoting the author himself or herself. So I hope that makes sense. Just be careful with that. And sometimes this is something that you need to review and revise and re-edit to make sure that that integration of the quote is of quality. So that's something you should review in your editing process. So after you do this part where you're integrating the quote, and actually you want to cite the quote as well. So here I am not grading you on the fact that you put a citation at the end here. But when you get to the paper, let's say you use this chart to write your paper later, and you're going to copy some of this information over into the research paper that you're writing, you will have to have an in-text citation here. Since you've already named the author, you would not have to put the author's name in the citation, in text citation, but you would need to put other identifiers in the in-text citation. I will probably, once we get to the point of writing the paper, post a video on how to properly use in-text citations. But that's just a little reminder that if it were me and I was doing this chart, I would probably include the citation just so I have it there and I don't have to recreate it in the paper. But it's not part of the grading for this assignment. Okay. Finally, we're going to synthesize the quote. So whenever you synthesize something, you're connecting it, okay? So you're putting it together. It's kind of two things or two purposes, and you're going to show how they connect, and that's synthesis. So when you synthesize, you want to provide evidence, or you want to provide a statement to show how that quote or how that point from the source connects to the thesis. You're not doing this literally, so you wouldn't write, this connects to the thesis but you want a statement that sort of explains and connects that quote or that point with the purpose of the paper. So synthesis is very important for, A-level writers in college. Synthesis, if you don't have any synthesis in your paper, to properly integrate the quotes and the information, it really does hurt the quality of the overall paper. And many professors would grade down because the ideas weren't connected. So that's a big thing in college writing, is that you want to connect ideas and you want to connect the source and the things that are cited in your paper to the thesis in some way. So remember, we've talked about having an overall purpose when you write, and having an overall purpose with understanding as the writer, you're the writer in this case, you're the researcher, how everything connects. So in turn, you have to provide some of that information to the reader so that everything's syncing up and it's sort of under one big umbrella and it makes sense. Okay, so you're going to do this, what I just explained, 3 times, okay? The last thing I want to say is, do not lose sight that you have to do a paragraph for each source that you're using. So you'll have 3 paragraphs. In that paragraph, you need to do a couple of things. So it's explained right here. So the paragraph should use the information in the same order that it's listed in the chart. And you're going to summarize the article. You're going to integrate the quote and I would say, think of the quote as sort of you're analyzing something about the article. You're showing some proof or some evidence from the article. So usually quotes do that. You're sort of pulling some information from the source into this overview, this evaluation of the source. And then finally, you're going to sync it up. So I had mentioned annotated bibliographies before. This is a sort of classic annotated bibliography paragraph. As I stated before, in 112, you'll do a 10-source annotated bibliography. And this chart is sort of developing the pieces of what would appear in an annotated bibliography. You're just sort of annotating or noting some things about the source. In most cases, an annotated bibliography has paragraphs. Now, if you get into grad school or upper level writing, say your senior year of college, in an upper level class, sometimes you may do longer than 1 paragraph. Sometimes you would do a paragraph each for summary, analyzing and synthesizing. You would have like different paragraphs for each one. Or in some cases, you have to do like a whole page. Like the instructor in grad school may say, hey, I need a whole page for each resource. But for this class and for English 112 and for most undergraduate, first, second year classes, you would just do like a paragraph in most cases. So this is an example of pulling information from the chart into a paragraph. And you just want a cohesive paragraph that summarizes, evaluates, or analyzes. With the evaluation, that's where you're pulling in the quote and sort of explaining it. And then finally, you want to synthesize it. You want to tie it all in to show the purpose of that source with the researcher. It's kind of apply meaning or purpose why that quote was used. All right. hopefully this helps you and explains. So remember that you do have to have 3 paragraphs, you do have to have 3 sources, and you do have to have 3 of the repeating things for the chart. If you do have any questions, let me know and I'll be glad to answer them. But I think this chart, this example chart, really does have all the ingredients you need to properly produce this assignment. And if you've gone through all of this and you still have questions, let me know.